The focus of this video is on how to paint heart-shaped flowers that have light reflecting through them. And to do that, I created a little bit of story. I added 2 mice, one mouse romantically giving a heart-shaped flower to his honey, and my 2 friends who requested how to paint these heart-shaped flowers that have light reflecting in them now have a story. So this is a 1.5 hour paint with me. What it includes is the heart-shaped flowers, 2 mice, mushrooms in the foreground, and some of the foreground flowers, not a whole lot. You will create your own background, and in 1.5 hours, you will have a very unique painting with me showing you just how to do the foreground. And this is Cheryl, the artist of Art by TerraCotta. I love making painting tutorials and talking about animals, and it would be awesome if you would paint with me. Okay, so let's begin. I am using the Pigment app, and I am a premium user, which means that I am using palettes and brushes that are very limited to the premium subscribers. So if you are not a premium, then it will be a little bit hard, but you know, there's nothing that's impossible. It just means that you have to do a workaround. Okay, so the palette I am using is Falling Leaves, and this is the principal palette that I use throughout. There are other palettes you can use. I'm not sure if this is for premium only, but anyway. I do use 3 other palettes during the paint, this 1.5 hour long paint. And basically it's only just to grab 1 or 2 colors from each one. Okay, so a little bit about the background. What you do when you make a background is you just turn on your bright green and bright blue and a bright pink, and you just throw a lot of color down. And when I say bright, turn it to the maximum darkness. I put everything at about medium opacity so that I get translucent colors, and the blues, those dark blues and those dark greens will pop through. And so you can see, if you look really carefully, that I have streaks of like deep pink and deep blue, and that's what the background is. At the top, I am using, from the green palette, I'm using 2 light greens, kind of a medium light green and a very light green, and I'm just doing bursts of light. And to do that, you can just go to the fill tool and go all the way down to blooms and grab that tool and turn it on kind of low or medium opacity and do your bursts of light or your blooms of light. I think both premium and non-premium have access to that tool. Okay, we can now begin painting in the present. Before I put in my purple vine shape, I actually had to kind of put in the shape of where the mice were going to be and where the mushrooms were going to be. Then I put in where I thought the lanterns were, and then after I got that kind of generally down, only then could I really know where I should put that vine. And actually, it looks like I did it one time. I actually did it 3 times, so you're getting the final copy. I had to delete a few things as I was figuring out the background, but now that you see how I was doing this, you won't make those mistakes. By the way, I don't have a reference picture. I'm just kind of pulling out of my head, so you have a reference and it'll be much easier for you to do. Okay, so once I have my vine in, I had to do a little correction on where those little lanterns were, and I'm doing this on very, very low opacity. And you can see me right now, I am correcting a lot of the background because I made a mistake, and I want you to see how I clean up those mistakes. So I had put in a light background where the lantern I thought was going to go, and now I want to drop the lantern a little bit lower. So I'm often picking up with, I just hold my Apple Pencil down on the tablet and I pick up the color, and then I just turn on maybe kind of a medium opacity and lightly brush over to clean up those mistakes. And I'm constantly picking up another color and blurring them. I don't use blur very much because I find that blur kind of disturbs, how I lay the colors down. And my go-to brush basically is the airbrush. Now, for the non-premium users, that will be a bit of a problem because that's one of the reasons I stick with premium. I love the airbrush and I couldn't live without it. But I think you can use the oil brush, and you can get quite a few nice, beautiful techniques with that. Almost the same. It leaves some streaks, but that's really the quality of oil brush, and you'll have beautiful painting if you only use the oil. I promise you with that. A lot of the techniques I use with airbrushing and oil are very similar. You will have to turn the opacity much lower though when you're using the oil brush. And right now I have already figured out where my lanterns are going to be, my little heart-shaped blooms. And before I put those very light heart-shaped blooms against that, the brighter green, I have to put a little bit of a darker green down so that I have a contrast of the very creamy whites that I will put on top. Otherwise, the white on top of the green isn't going to be very eye-arresting, and I want to make quite the statement. I also want to give like the depth. When light is shining through a marble, you actually have, light is spinning around inside of that marble, and you have a darker aspect and a lighter aspect, and I want to create that contrast. So it's kind of a secret of how to paint something that's more round or in the shape, in the situation, kind of heart-shaped. Ironically, I use the same green for that darker green to put on top of the light green blooms in the background. And when I took that darker green over to the left side where, the background is very dark, that darker green appears quite light actually, which is fine. It's still, I'm putting down like the idea of where I'm going to be putting my blooms, getting this down right. And so now as I'm putting in the creamy bloom on top, it looks quite nice, and you can see I have a dark center, which is perfect. This is the element I want. And by the way, keep your opacity quite low, maybe about, I'm guessing, I don't see right now, but I would guess it's about 30%. A couple tips on the control of your pen size and about, how dark or light you're making your colors. I keep my pen size quite small, and you'll see me as I'm doing these blooms that I'm constantly adjusting between, I think, sizes maybe 7 to 15. When I'm doing the top of a bloom, I might have it a little bit larger. At the bottom where there's going to be a point, I will definitely make it smaller because I want to make, I want to keep that bottom part more pointed. Also about the color I'm using, I'm on the falling leaves on that creamy color, and I've turned the temperature of the color way down so that it's not at the whitest, but it's quite at one of the lightest colors. At no time do you want to go full white on any of these until you're doing your final touch at the last part. When your color is at the lightest, that light point is what you're going to be using for your accents. You don't want to start coloring that way because you'll have nothing lighter to go to create your accent. So that's a major tip that you should remember when you're painting. And I save those little bright points for like the peak of the arch on the heart bloom, just so it looks like it's captured light there and the light is refracting off of maybe the little arches or through just maybe the bottom point. That's where the light would hit very brightly, and it would be very, very obvious. Okay, now for the fun moment, to put the lantern into that mouse's little hands. He's picking a lantern for his honey, and she's all goo goo gaga'd down below. So I'm trying to get the image in, just kind of the outline, and I'm not using a light, I'm using more of a tan color just to get the image of where I'm going to put some of the lighter colors on top. That way I don't have to erase over it, but I can just color on top of my little, it's like putting down a sketch. Okay, now we're going to be doing some highlighting. I've turned my brush down to size 5. It's much finer, and I think before it was maybe 7 to 15, but now it's at 5. And I've put the opacity up to 51. I might have also made the color a little bit lighter, but I don't think so. I see in the future I'm going to have to make this more apparent for you to see so you can reference it without paying so much attention. I apologize for that, but if you have other suggestions about how to make this better in the future, please let me know. But I'll need to make the opacity and whatever clearer so you can just kind of visually glance at it. But anyway, it's at 5%, and I'm just hitting the top edges and going over the outside of the heart-shaped blooms on this side, on the near side, not on the far side. The far side needs to be darker. It's further away, so to push that depth away, you're going to keep those tones darker on the far side of the heart-shaped lantern. I'm being very careful with that point. I'm trying to drag it down a little bit, and I'm putting a little bit more pressure, and I'm slowing down, so that makes it look whiter than the other areas. And by the way, my touch is very light. I am just kind of drifting my hand over the canvas, and I realize that some people push harder. I hardly push. I'm letting the pin do most of the pressure. My hand just kind of touches across the top of the canvas, and this makes a huge difference on the amount of color that's being thrown down on the canvas and how opaque it is, because the more pressure means it's more opaque. A few seconds ago, I had switched it from 5 down to 4% on the brush size, and that's how I'm getting such fine marks. And in a couple of seconds, I'm going to switch it even down to 3% at 73% opacity. And it's all relative on how you do it, but what I'm doing is putting more opacity just on those peak areas and highlighting again. It's all about layers, putting layer on top of layer. And at first you use a wider brush to put down the outline and the shapes. And then as you get your outlines in, you're putting in your peak colors. Right now I'm putting those accent colors in a very bright white. I haven't changed the temperature of the color, but I have changed the opacity, which makes a huge difference. And as I'm touching on the top of it, I'm really moving my hand slowly, which means I'm probably putting a little bit more pressure. Certainly as I'm hitting those tips, I'm very carefully putting the pressure and just lightly moving the brush up and down. It was kind of fun seeing the tips of those little lantern bits get dark, or actually I should say really light, kind of bright against that dark background, which is just exciting to see these kind of pictures evolve. So really this is just the beginning of those little blooms. I continued to outline certain areas, and at some point I put in the brush a little bit darker just to put more of a white glow around in several areas, but I am constantly back and forth playing with those colors and readjusting them. You can see that I am really slowly and layer by layer touching them up. Even though it looks like I just changed brushes, actually I didn't. I just opened it up and tapped on the airbrush again. I did change color, and I'm now putting in a light orange just to put a little bit of a glow or some kind of like brightness now against the white. And on top of that orange, I'm going to put the yellow. I don't want to put the yellow directly on top of the green, otherwise it'll have kind of a blue look. The colors will merge funny. So first I put down the orange, and then I will touch it up with a lighter color. And it's about building up color. These colors are all semi-transparent. Maybe they're 50% opacity or less. And it's these layers of color that are transparent. You know, you can see these colors underneath. That is actually giving all of these lanterns and the little mice and the mushrooms and the floor of this forest this kind of luminosity that a single color just wouldn't have. Here I am changing and I'm moving on to the Halloween brush. I'm sorry, the Halloween palette. The Halloween palette, I just needed a bright yellow. And in the Falling Leaves palette, the yellow there was too dull. And it's not quite bright enough for what I wanted. And now I'm moving back to the Falling Leaves. And oops, I didn't get the Falling Leaves palette. I got another one, so I have to reopen and get that Falling Leaves palette. There are so many palettes in here, and I don't tend to use very many of them. I have favorites. Falling Leaves is definitely one of my favorites. I just like the deeper, kind of muted tones. Anyway, it's one of my go-tos. I'm taking the purples and now darkening that stem, the overhanging stem. I think my brush is, yes, my brush is really small at this point, just because I am on the point of the end of the stem. I have darkened the purple and have putting a darker purple shadow underneath so that the light will be more on top. The brush I just used is the blur, and at the end of that stem there was just a little bit of too much of a color or a mistake, or anyway, it just needed to be blurred into the background. I just put a couple swipes and then I'm back to my airbrush tool. I don't use that blur very much. Again, right now I am doing a little bit of blur maybe. I just hardly ever use that, but it's a very handy tool. I just try not to use it too much around largely contrasting where I'm doing detail work, and that stem has already been pretty much done, so I don't want to blur it now. And whew, I just did a blur. What I'm using is the fill. It's one of the packages, and at the very bottom is the bloom, and I'm putting little blooms in the background, and that was a bright, overly done bloom. I just hit the delete button and kept going at it. Right now I am using a green palette, and I was starting out with the cream blooms from the Falling Leaves palette, but it was too kind of opaque just because it's so white. So that's why I moved to this green yellow, and the green yellow is a very translucent color. So I'm using a kind of a yellow green and a green yellow at different opacities to get kind of the far distant bloom and the closer bloom. And of course you pick out little ones and you make some that are generously large. Just vary them up and it's kind of magical, the creation. You'll notice that I only put them at the top third of this coloring. If I put them any lower, it would kind of brighten the floor of the forest floor, and that wouldn't be appropriate. Back in the Falling Leaves palette, it's time to flesh out my little mouse. So I keep dropping the size of the brush, and the opacity, I started at 37, I dropped it down to 25, then it went down to 23, and now it's 22. And the brush size I vary depending on, where I'm outlining. If I'm doing the outside, it's going to be a little bit small, as long as the brush itself is blurry, and I'm still getting it, because this is like the sketch or the outline. I don't want hard lines for the outline. I am using only the tan, but I keep adjusting, how light or dark it is. But for the most part, this little mouse, the sketching is done in the tan. I am varying the size of the brush. Right now it's dropped down to, I think it's 3, just because I want the hard lines for the little cute paws, and I want a lot of definition. Remember, this is still the sketch, and so I'm not having it at high opacity, but I am putting in a pretty, solid sketch right now. Very particular. I don't mind, because this is furry and it's dark. Because it's furry, there's going to be a little bit of a blurry texture along the edge, and because it's dark, of course, you're going to be a little bit out of focus. So I'm not going for, very well-defined edges on this mouse at all. But the paw and the nose and along the very tip of the nose, I will be much more specific. Still using that tan, I'm going to be doing the ears. I just turned down the color temperature. It's more along the whiter side to make those ears. And all I did was make a loop. I didn't fill it in or anything. I'm letting the background colors, underneath colors, paint the middle of that ear. I'll touch it up later, of course, and make it look more realistic. But this is the beginning shape. Also, when I filled in the body of the little mouse, I turned it on maybe 30. The size of the brush was size 30. And that way I could do 1 or 2 quick swipes. I'm not leaving any lines. If I use a smaller brush, I would have lines like it's a marker or a colored pencil. You can see the swipes back and forth. I don't want that. Because I have the airbrush, or if you're using the oil brush, you don't really need to show those lines. You can hide them. And right now I'm going very carefully along the nose. My brush has been turned down in size considerably, just so I can get more of a sharpness. I am using still the tan. Almost the entire mouse is done in tan. Later I add a little bit of color to make it look phenomenal as far as, more alive and warm. But this is just the base. I am picking up color from the background because that mouse was really fat. He's supposed to be reaching upward and grabbing a little blossom for his honey, and he was just too fat at the top. So I trimmed his body down like he's stretching, and that's really easy to do with the airbrush or with the oil. And then you just hold your pencil down, your Apple Pencil, and pick up the color from the background. There's a little palette explosion of light. You've picked up the color, and then just drag it along the side of the body. And that little fatness will disappear. You control how much you want it to disappear. I continue to pick up color around the feet also. My brush is very fine as I'm going along the edge of the toes. I'm trying to define them. And the toes are quite tan yellow against that burnt reddish background, which is great. You want these kind of contrasts in your painting or coloring because it really ups your coloring, for lack of a better word. I'm going along the stomach now. I'm still keeping the stomach somewhat blurry, but I've added a little bit of lighter color along the edge. And you'll notice that I maintained the background around the neck. I maintained that blue-green depth of color. I never colored there. Let the background paint part of your coloring, because anytime you bring in some of the background colors into your subject and vice versa, from your subject you put into the background, you are having some kind of cohesion or harmony of your painting. And that's what makes painting stand out. I'm sure you've seen people who have pinks and reds in the background and blues and greens in the front and they just don't look good. If you merge those colors somehow, then you will have harmony in your painting. That is just a top secret for, it's not even a secret, for having a great painting or coloring. And now that the nose has been sharpened with the size 6 brush, I'm still using size 6, I'm going to be putting in the eye. And it's not a clear eye, but it's just a hint about where the eye is going to be. So I just kind of darken that area. I'll put in the beady little eye with more definition later. Then I'm using the size 9 and I'm adding some more detail to the back of the head and onto the mushroom. I've pumped it up to size 15 just because the lines are going to be broader. Adding some different color, trying to visualize how I want this. Remember, I don't have a reference photo, so I'm trying to figure out what looks good and what doesn't. And I'm not really liking those lines. It's looking a little bit weird, so I'm putting the blender on it, just touching it up with the blend, just to kind of blur those harsh lines together. Because this is dark, it's kind of a darker side of the mushroom, and so it shouldn't have harsh lines. And then now I'm back to the regular airbrush. I've popped it up to 15, and I'm just going along the edges loosely. It's at 50% opacity, which is a little bit high for this, but I do want the mushroom to be quite clear, and I'm not going to put multiple layers on top of that like I do for the mice and for the flowers themselves. Because it's a darker object, I don't need to put on multiple layers. And it's not really the primary focus either. So I just have to define the layers, the edges, and that's what I'm doing with the yellow one right now. And I don't want repeating shapes. So the red or the orange mushroom is going to be a little bit shorter and squatter, and the yellow one is going to be taller and a little bit thinner, just to add a little bit more diversity and interest to the picture. I'm carefully going along the edges right now, trying to define where are my edges, and then I can put in some kind of texturing inside, some kind of special color. On this one, I have chosen to use more of a bright orange. Trying to find the definition. What do I want there? I'm not sure. I'm just kind of experimenting. And this is the fun part. Just play with your colors. And eventually it's going to be a little bit darker and more textured. Putting a little bit more of a darker edge along the bottom. Not sure I'm liking any of this, but I keep playing. Darkening it up with a little bit more orange, readjusting, putting some orange inside of that bright orange, kind of like dimples. Why not? Who knows what kind of mushrooms are in Magic Mouse Land? Right now I'm looking at this and I am definitely not liking it. Anyway, I'll get to it eventually. Right now my brush is size 24, which is a little bit larger. I'm doing some larger areas like, the tops of the mushrooms, or just kind of expanses of color, not any kind of delicate detail. So along the outer rim of the lower orange mushroom, some other touch-up areas. And now I just dropped it to 12, size 12, and I'm doing the lower stem. And now size 12 is getting me some detail. not specific detail, but I want that blur of color along the lower stem. And so now I popped it up to 70. I want a large bit of color down for the body, dropped it down to 42 for the head, and I'm constantly going to be readjusting the size of that brush in the next few minutes as I work on different body parts and just kind of block in the color. It's down to 17 as I do the arms, and I can tell that I'm pushing a little bit on those arms because they came out darker. Usually I said that I was just lightly gliding over the surface of the canvas or the palette itself. But on this one I am actually pressing, and I put a little bit of pressure on the tips of the ears. Going a little bit slower there. And on the left side of the body, I'm putting a little bit more pressure to bring out a little bit of a lighter side. I'm blocking in those feet, and after I block them in, I turn it down to 4 or 5, and I get some detail. 4 for the feet, and then 5, I am blocking out some of the extra blur so that I can have clearly defined feet. I just tap in the dark color, pick up that color, and then with size 5, I'm blurring right along the edge of the feet, defining them, and they're looking pretty sharp right now. So I keep working on the body of that little mouse, and right now I'm trying to define it better. I've got the good shape down, and I'm trying to, define clearly the head, put in some different color. So I'm at the stage where I'm actually making it look more mouse-like and more animated and cute. I'm putting in the rusty brown first on top of the tan, and then a little bit of the warmer orange. And that's just to warm up the mouse, to give it kind of a warmer glow, make it look friendlier. This is a romantic picture after all, so we should have warm colors in it. And I'm just doing quick little swipes of color just to warm the left side of the mice. Not that that's where the light is coming from, but it just seems like it was appropriate where I should be warming it. I was consistent about where to light up the mice, but now looking at this I realize that my mushroom is lit up from the back. The source of light is coming from the back, and on the mice it's not quite so accurate. Oops. Well, it was cute until I just recognized that point just now as I'm analyzing my own painting. So I'm defining where the eye goes right now, dropping the opacity down to 16. The brush is already very fine. Just trying to figure out where that eye goes. You'll notice that I've put it in and deleted and put it in again. Just a fraction of a millimeter can make a difference about the eye. The eye is where the soul of the animal is. That's where the interest lies. If it has a sleepy look, then the whole body will actually look sleepy also. So you spend a lot of time on the eye and the face. Make sure those colors are right, warm, positions of eye and mouth and nose, especially the eye. Can't emphasize that enough. So I'm defining the lower jaw and again highlighting along the body. I'm just cleaning it up, bringing out some brightness. My brush, I'm not sure of the size, but I'm going to guess it's like 3 or 4. It's very fine, and it's now for hitting on those highlights, the highlights of the feet, the highlights of the lower body. Just adding small highlights, just in some choice areas, to make it look like a full, rounded character. Got cream on right now, and I'm adding a little bit of a bigger belly to that mouse. I'm not sure if it needs it, but mice are kind of round and cute. And the female mouse is supposed to be a little bit plumper according to tradition. Maybe my mouse is rather traditional, I'm not sure. Adding some darkness in the inner ear. I'm using just the mid-tone of the rusty red. Again, the lighter part underneath. Back and forth as I adjust those colors. Touching up the other mouse's ear and the back of his head a little bit, warming it up. Defining the lower body. They don't have tails yet. That will come last. The tails will be stretched out across the mushrooms or the foliage, and once the tails are in, the same as whiskers or other the fine details, that's when you have to really be careful about the background painting. And if you want to change it, it's rather hard when you have these details on in front. So I save those kind of details for the last. And so I gradually add more definition along the edge of that lower rusty mushroom. Some more lines. I'm changing the temperature of the colors a lot, the size of the brushes. I'm starting to work on a lot of detail around the feet, that reddish mushroom and the feet. I zoom in because I want to be really particular about the shape of that foot, getting a little bit of shadow in there. You can see it's size 7, but remember I'm zoomed way in. The reason I zoom in is so that I can get close detail. I can get kind of like perfect lines. And this is the beauty of the airbrush and the oil brush. When I zoom in and out, while it might look really good at the close-up level, when I zoom out, sometimes there's too much detail. So if I put too much definition, and I want this to be a little bit fuzzy, a little bit blurry because it's a night scene, if I put too much detail, then I'm going to have to take off. Or if I got too much darkness of color, then I will have to lighten it. And you'll see that I'm not adding considerable. For example, if it's an orange, I'm not going to leap into 3 or 4 temperatures colder orange. I will go gradually. And this is why a lot of my paintings and colorings, I have gradual gradations of the color. People often comment on that. And the secret is I spend a lot of time gradually easing into those colors rather than making giant leaps. And I know that a lot of the great artists who work in colored pencil do the same. They put layer on layer on layer, and I think this goes with pastels and watercolor. You just have to build up those colors. Acrylic is the same. Acrylic, not so much. Acrylic is more of an opaque, but digital painting, it can be opaque or it can be transparent. You decide. And I tend to work in maybe the 30 to 50% transparency range on the opacity, that is. I'm putting in a little more definition along the mushrooms. This is just detail work. It's picky. This is one of the reasons that I didn't make a 3-hour tutorial. You don't need to see all the detail work of the background. The background is very personal. It's very individualistic, and there's no way you're going to copy mine. So create your own awesome background. And I'm just showing you how to make the mushrooms in the foreground, the mice, of course, and the heart-shaped little bellflowers. Right now I'm putting in a little bit of a shadow along the back of it, cleaning it up, cleaning up that edge. Brightening some in the foreground. as I look at it, I don't like it, but I'm sure I had vision when I did this. I actually painted this maybe a week ago, so I'm a little surprised now looking at my own painting about how I did certain things and the thought processes, or was there a thought process? Was I just being creative as I went? And yes, that's often how I paint. It's about zen for me. I just let the colors sing and carry me along. I am picking up some color in the background. You can see, I grabbed the color. And along the edge of the back of the mouse and the mushroom, you can see that it's very blurry. That's because I was coloring at a little bit of a higher blur. The brush size was a little bit large. And that's great. When you are first laying down color, of course you're going to do that. To refine your painting, then you'll clean up those areas in the background. And I am constantly picking up the background color, like just right now, and cleaning up that blur. I am sure that my brush size is quite low. I'm going to guess it's maybe anywhere from a 3 to a 5. Zooming in and zooming out, making sure that I like what I see. Is it too dark? Just adding more definition along the lower side. It looks so much better now that that blur along the back of the mouse and along that yellow mushroom has been cleaned up. This is when you start entering the steps to realism. This is really picky detail work. Another reason why you don't need a 3-hour tutorial. This is the kind of work that I like. It drives other people crazy. But when people are on the Pigment app and they're drawing mandalas, for me, there's no story involved. This is me telling a story. You can make it up as you go, but you have mice and love, mushrooms in the background, a little bit of foliage, some leaves or whatever, and I'm starting to kind of put in hints of leaves in the background just to add more depth. And it's just really at a light I'm just lightly touching the back of the canvas. I'm actually seeing if I like it. Am I really going to put something there? Are the leaves too small? Actually, these are flower petals. Are these flower petals too small? Do they overpower the mouse? Or are they appropriate size? So I'm starting with kind of a darker orange, the rusty, and just putting in hints of color. Now I'm putting in a little bit of the warmer orange on one side, so I can have one side that's lit up a little bit, and that those two oranges on the background, that's kind of a deep blue and green, actually is what is creating beautiful colors. There's a lot of transparency going on. There's a lot of color being thrown back at the eye. We're actually interpreting so much color and joy just by what we're seeing in these very light flowers. And I'll build them up gradually. The orange goes beautifully against the purple. Remember that those are two very nice complementary colors when you're painting or coloring or just to use. Blues and yellows, reds and greens, oranges and purples. Darkening them, or actually I should say I'm lightening the colors. I'm using the yellow still, but I have turned down, I've brightened the color. Some people wonder why I don't use the color wheel. I don't really know how to effectively use the color wheel, and because I'm always changing colors, it would kind of be irritating for me to maybe use orange, the temperatures of orange, and then I want to go to a green and different temperatures. This way, I have a palette in front of me, and I can hit the green and I can slide the temperature along, and then fluidly move to the orange without having to change the dial on the color wheel. I guess that's the reason I don't really enjoy using the color wheel. I'm constantly changing the colors in the background to the rusty orange, pressing a little bit harder this time. Zooming in and out, checking on how it looks. Do I like it? Do I not? These are beautiful fall colors. It's perfect for this time of year. When you're painting a background like this, you don't have to paint every leaf, every stem. It's the background. Let the eye put a lot of things together. You can put a line, but you don't have to connect the line. You can put part of the flower, but you don't have to put the whole flower. The eye and the mind will interpret that as a whole flower. The detail work goes in the foreground. And my mice have a lot of detail, and those little heart-shaped flowers have the magical detail. Those are the focus of the focus of this painting. And it's quite dark in the background, so I think I need to pop in some centers to my flowers. And those centers really brighten it up. It looks more like a garden in the background, like she's more popping out of a garden. Kind of increases the romanticism of the scene. This is a little bit of green, just touches. It adds a difference against the purple. Orange, green, and purple make beautiful harmony. So that's what I'm hoping to do. With touches of yellow in the centers of those flowers, this is like magical for the eye. I'm hoping I'm massaging your eye, and when you paint yours, you can massage mine. It's kind of the joy. Create something that people can really enjoy. Choose your colors well, and it will be a feast on paper or on your palette, on your canvas. I do want to increase the darkness around the white bellflower, and you saw me adjust the temperature to a really dark level so that the lower bellflower could have something, a really darkness to contrast itself with. So on to more detail about getting some deeper colors in that background. It's already quite dark, but because I've brightened some areas with the leaves of the petals and some leaves of the foliage too, the flower foliage, I want to add in a little bit of a darker purple just to increase that contrast. So here you can see I'm putting a very dark purple underneath the white bellflower, and that's to make the dark purple and the white pop, or to make the white pop, not the purple. Also, I'm adding just a little bit along the back of the mouse, not all of the mouse, just in one or two areas, trying to separate the head, bring the head forward, put those flowers further in the background, and that is the goal. By deepening the contrast between the mouse's head and the background, I've actually brought the head forward, and it looks more like it's standing upright and not so much like a 2D, but more like a 3D character. And I'm doing this along this side. Don't worry, I'm going to blend it in. Right now it looks kind of bad with an outline right there, but it will be blended in, and some of the orange of the flowers will be overlapping some of that purple, and it will look more natural. This is just a step in the process of bringing the mouse forward. You can't do everything at once. I think many people, they want to take a shortcut in their paintings and they skip certain steps that would have enhanced their painting. And so, yeah, I don't mind the detail work. I actually really enjoy it. Right now I'm outlining around the character itself, the little upright mouse, its feet, its body, around the foliage. And I'm using, it looks like a dark green. And it's really hard to pick up these colors, but you can tell that it's not just one color when you're really zoomed in. I have a hard time telling when I'm painting. I just know that they're different as I'm laying down the color. Now as I see them in video, I can see, that was a dark blue or a dark green. Something to do with the angle that I'm painting in, I can't really tell. So it's kind of cool seeing it now in this video, the effect. So I zoom in and out. I'm looking for areas that might need darkening, or maybe the contrast is too much. Always checking that. Just bringing the little mouse forward, a little bit more depth there along the right side. Doing a little bit more detail with perfecting the edges of my two larger mushrooms. Just expect them to look clean and neat and near photo. It's not going to be photorealistic, but to look quite realistic is my goal. And I know I've colored this before, but I will color it again. It's all about perfecting the colors until I like them. And that's why I don't mind putting in a background 2 or 3 times. I'm just waiting until I see something that really connects to me. And then I'm like, yes. And that becomes my purpose. And actually, when I was painting this, I just generally had an idea. Okay, a mouse on 2 or 3 mushrooms, picking a white bloom that has to be heart-shaped because that's what my friend requested, and giving it to the honey. And as far as the background and how the overhead arch of the stem would be, I had no idea. And I didn't really know about the background colors, but as the painting kind of evolved, I'm quite liking the colors. Of course, it's one of my favorite palettes. Okay, I'm just cleaning up some of the areas that could use a little bit more light or definition. So I'm lightening this part of the far side of the mushroom in order to make it pop forward. That would, the light source is coming from the back, according to the mushrooms. And so that mushroom should be backlit. And that's what I'm just trying to do now, is to give it a little bit of a backlighting, outlining a little bit around the mushroom, just checking on the color temperatures and the highlights where they should be and where they are. I'm doing an outline around the mushroom right now. I want a little bit of a rougher bottom because that's more photorealistic. If you're always going for the smooth line, then you aren't really challenging yourself artistically. Try to capture nature. Try different kinds of line strokes, different kinds of topics. Okay, for more readjusting on that reddish mushroom, I zoom in and out. I'm checking the lower levels. I'm adding some shadow. I'm going to be working at this for a little bit. It took me a while to get those mushrooms how I wanted them. I did change the background quite a bit, but then we have to think about the end result. Now, if the mushrooms are backlit, that means on this side there's going to be a shadow. And it's appropriate to put in a little bit of purple for the shadow. Purple and yellow, it looks nice together. I'll adjust that again and again. Deepening the purple shadow on the yellow mushroom. Trying to put some lines in. Mushrooms often have lines. I think I was using size 6 so that I could get lines, but it's not going to be like a sharp edge. And I thought they were a little bit too bright, so I toned them down a little bit. Just touch-up work along the edge of the mouse's feet, the mouse on the mushroom, on the back of the mushroom itself. Trying to figure out how much light I can put there, and when does it become too bright? Because it is on the back, so I'm constantly zooming in and out. I'm actually getting really amused by my painting because I didn't realize I spent so much time on that rusty red mushroom, and I really did. I knew it was difficult for me and I redid it twice, but I'm really spending a lot of time. Zoom in, zoom out, check it out. Right now the brush is at 19% size, and I would guess that it's quite low in opacity, at least probably around the 50% mark, maybe less. I have noticed that in this video there are 2 brush sizes that I really go to a lot. I like size 4 for small details when I zoom in, and I like size 9 for a decent size of a brush for, like the mouse's arm, or for along the edge of the flower, a larger flower, or the edge of an ear. I just like those 2 sizes. I've seen those sizes appear a lot, so it must be a favorite. I do know that when I zoom way in for really fine detail, like maybe mandala or even signing my name in a really tiny way, I go down sometimes to 1 or 2. I very rarely hit it to 0. And 0 is, when you zoom back out, 0 appears like a scratch, and I don't like the effect. So while zoomed in it looks great, when it's zoomed way out, I am not liking scratches on my paintings, and so I don't use 0 typically. So I'm picking up some of the really dark color and going right along the edge of the heart-shaped lantern blossom. And my brush has to be really super fine here to do this kind of detail work. I think that was a size 2. I'm not sure. I missed it. When I zoom in, you'll see me pick up a little bit of color. I might color just a few centimeters, and then I will pick up another bit of color because my background has gradient colors. I really do spend quite a bit of time on the detail work, But this is something that people should see. How to do the detail work to polish a painting or a drawing and to take it to the next level. So there have been some blurs put off by my brush as I was laying down the first initial colors or the swipes of the brush, because I was using, I was trying to get the sketch down. And I used the larger brush to outline where I was going to be painting. And I gradually changed my brush to a smaller and smaller size. Now, because I'm using an airbrush, there is a bit of fuzziness out there. And so that's what I'm cleaning up now. And I do spend a little bit of time cleaning it up because I want it to look nice. And it is amazing, by just going around the edge, even just one time, with this kind of a gradient pickup, the gradient extra blur pickup. If you can do that and eliminate some, you don't even have to eliminate all, you have just made your painting potentially much more to be appreciated. To create the dark edging along those stems, I'm picking up the colors not only by the stems, but kind of broadly too. So if you look closely, you can see that it was a dark blue. Actually, it was a very bright blue that I put on maximum darkness on that color scale. And probably, sometimes I think I'm working at about a 17% brush size, just for the broader look. When I zoom in, I go down to 9 and sometimes 4. Here I'm going in really closely. I'm starting at 4 degrees brush size, and I actually drop it down to 2, which is really fine, and I'm zoomed way in. But you can see that it's kind of a harsh line, so I don't want to use a lot of that harsh line, but it does help me make sure that it's crisp. And when I'm cleaning up some of the background, I can use size 4 and then put little touches of size 2, and I think the under part of the mushroom is a good place to put the size 2. Otherwise, size 4 is really nice for just cleaning up the edge and not making it totally crisp, but making it quite nice, especially when you zoom out. And that's why I zoom in and out a lot, just to see how it's looking from a distance, because up close, I can tell that it's looking pretty good. Picking up a little bit more color, trying to blend it in very naturally, and I'm trying to pick up color from almost the same place where I'm going to be blending, because there's so many gradients, there's so many variations here. Underneath there's more blue, underneath that little mushroom, and above there's more purple. I'm sorry, I just said it the other way around. There's more purple underneath, and there's more blue above. And on with color. I'm trying to make it crisp underneath. That means underneath I'm really careful to put a little bit more of a darker color, just because if you have light from above or even from an above at an angle, underneath is always going to be a little bit darker. And so I have a little bit of a blue pop above that we've already noticed. So I want a deeper purple, purple is deeper than blue, a deeper purple under the orange. And it's not a black, but it's a purple black. Zooming along, now I want to put that stem in the background. So I have to put a little shadow between the yellow mushroom and on that stem. And by doing that, I have just pushed that mushroom, it's no longer against the yellow mushroom, but it's now a little bit behind the yellow mushroom. Just little secrets of how to add depth when you are painting or coloring. Doing the same now on the red, just adding a little bit of a shadow underneath, And I don't have to be perfect. I am maybe not really accurate about where my pen is going, but that's okay. Just go with it. Play with colors. That's all you have to do. Now these streaks on the yellow mushroom on the purpling part are looking kind of good. Kind of a natural way of giving it some character. One of the things about real airbrushing is it can be so perfect that just because it's so perfect, it doesn't look real. And I don't ever want to take my paintings to that level. It's not a level that I really appreciate. To have things that are quite real, though, now that is awesome, and I do like it. Okay, now I'm doing a little bit more doctoring on our little mouse. His nose needs a little bit more defining, and you know, we're zoomed way in. We can see that obviously there's a bit of a blur from the tan on the green of the background. So we're going to be cleaning that up, cleaning up some of the blur around the ears. I'm going to sharpen it really well. But first we have to make sure that the face itself is properly outlined. And we just lightened the forehead and along the nose. Now we're putting in a little bit of a darker color around the edge of the ears. They're kind of cute, have a cute little fold to them, and so we want to make it look darling and really special. And yes, I think it looks quite baby-like or very cute. From this angle, it kind of looks like it's sucking on that heart-shaped bloom, but it's not. It's just the appearance. The face needs a lot of detail around the ears, around the edge of the head. This is what makes it look really cute, is to give it that detail and that definition. I think I'm using a 6 or a 7% brush size around the ears just for those finer details. It's still blurry enough, but there's enough definition with the 6 and a 7 to really get some good quality lines in there and some blurs of color too. So I just turned it up to a 14 just for a quick swipe of color along the face. Just 1 or 2 strokes, and then I'm back down to a smaller size. Using tans along the ear. Again, it's about putting the layers of color. I put some edging down, and now I'm bringing out some of the brighter colors of the ear. And I'll go back and forth adjusting, finding out what I like. Putting a little bit of a warmer color on the back side of the ear, the lower side. I don't want the ear to only be one color. It needs to have one side that's darker than the other. Usually one color or one side will be a little bit warmer than the other, maybe a cooler brown and a warmer brown. And along the edge of that ear, it looks so adorable zoomed in, you know, just having that little bit darker, and it's a warm brown edge on the ear. And some of the oranges on the top of the head. I'm warming it up. That is making it look very engaging, warm. Then if you just have a simple yellow mouse, by putting a little bit of warm colors on the top, it looks a bit more romantic. Also, you'll notice that those warm colors are reflected in the bell-shaped flowers. I put some of that warm yellow on the back of the little mouse, and he looks so cute. size 2. I had it down to size 1. That was just too small, too scratchy. But I put it on size 2 just to get along the edge of that foot. I want that really sharp detail down there. Trying to bring out the toe. Now it's up to size 5 because I'm doing highlights on the top. The size 1 and 2, now I didn't use the 1, but the size 2 was for highlighting just a little bit of the shadow alongside the foot. Just bringing out some highlights on the edge of the foot, on the edge of the ear. This is getting into the last details. Trying to make a good contrast between bright areas and dark areas. I'm not sure if everybody likes playing like this, but I actually like these details. It's fun for me. 11% now, just for some quick swaths of color. Again, I am just lightly touching the canvas. And by the way, I'm using, Paper-like? And there's 2 surfaces for Paper-like. One is like glass and one feels like paper, and it has a little bit of a texture. One of my friends has the one that's a little bit of texture. Wow, what a heavenly experience. I can take my pen and I can just write. I have so much control with penmanship. However, I don't really like it as well for drawing pictures, just because some of that texture gets in the way of the really fine details. Otherwise, it's great. And also my friend says that after every 3 weeks, now she pushes hard, after every 3 weeks she has to change the pen nib. And that's wearing your pen nib down pretty darn fast. I've been using the same pen nib for, 1 year now, maybe 13 months. Same one, and I have colored 190 pictures or something like that in Pigment. That's a lot of pictures. So with the glass-like, when I get another iPad, I will almost definitely, get the glass-like Paper-like. Just because as my pen moves across in a stroke, for laying down color, the glass is perfect for that. It's almost a spiritual, line that I'm creating, but with the Paper-like, for the Paper-like texture, that is, it's better for penmanship. Those are the differences that I noticed. And perhaps people are interested in that. I don't know, people are interested in studios and other details about artists, so I thought you might appreciate that piece of information. So here I'm going along the foot yet again, and this is with the size 3, and I'm just putting in that last little bit of dark shadow. I want the foot to look like it's on the mushroom and not above the mushroom. And you can do that by just putting in a little bit of darker edge on this side because the light is from the further side. So I'm paying careful attention about how I'm darkening that, and I'm using kind of the rusty red from the Fallen Leaves palette. When you make this one into a really dark color, it actually is closer to black as I see it than maybe a blue or some of the purples. So I can get really dark colors that are great for shadows, and then you put a little bit of a dark purple on top of that, and you have a great shadow. So this is the color I'm using, and it also goes with the mushroom because that's a rusty orange mushroom. When you are doing shadow, you don't use black. And I would suggest that you don't even use purple all the time either. To make a really good shadows, you just deepen the color that you're using. For example, if you're using a bright green, just mute it down. Maybe add some purples, or, if you're doing watercolor, if you add reds to greens, that will really make it dark. If you add a little bit of blue or yellow, or depending on what, if it's a warm green or a cool green, and if your red is a warm or cold, then you can start to make kind of a muddy color. And anyway, there are certain ways to create the dark colors. And I have learned the secret with the Pigment app is to take some of these colors, and I personally like reds and bright pinks, and I put them to the darkest on that slide, and I have incredibly dark, very beautiful shadows. I am now adding a little bit more distance between the orange mushroom and the yellow one. I'm not putting a line from separating it completely. I'm putting a line more in the middle and then letting the eye more or less connect it perfectly. So it's there, but it's darker certainly in the middle. I'm trying to lighten the edge of the reddish or the orangish mushroom, because that far edge is where the light is going to be hitting, striking it, throwing the shadows on this side. So I deepen those shadows a little bit, put in some lines, and you'll notice that the lines are a different color than the purple of the initial shadow, which is great. So obviously, clearly you can see 3 different colors there. Your eye is picking up more colors, but you can label 3 at least. Now, ironically, we really haven't seen much green in this. Yes, there's been green at the top, a very pale yellow green, but now I've taken kind of an olive green and I've darkened it. And this is now what I'm using as the background. You will notice that the blue, the dark blue that I used, it kind of throws back color. This dark green that I'm using swallows the color. And it's nice to have this contrast. So the dark green is now a great shadow for using as a cast shadow for the mushrooms. And then that dark blue, which is still quite luminous, is really good for between where the light might still be playing softly through the trees and you might be getting hints of light. And right now I am putting in what I think of as a little bit of a background. I want to add a little bit more texture. The mushrooms are just kind of hanging there. They don't have really any ground to lay against. There's no leaf there, mounds of dirt. There's really nothing, and so I need to put something, just especially because this is more in the foreground than the other flowers, just to add the interest and maybe a sense of completeness, and certainly a sense of balance, because if you have flowers on the left and mushrooms on the right but a little bit of a gap with nothing in it, it seems like you could put a few wildflowers, something, textures of grass or something. So again, I'm lightly penciling them in, and I think I'm drawing them a little bit smaller this time than on the other side. That's what my gut reaction is right now. And that's fine. Maybe it's a different species of flower, I don't know. I put down a few leaves first, and that might be almost a full flower, but not quite, like a daisy. And then I'm coming in with the yellow and completing that daisy with the yellow on top of a few of the other leaves or the petals, and then adding 1 or 2 additional petals. And this is creating kind of an orange yellow flower, kind of blurry. I don't need detail, Remember, it's a night scene. You're not going to get a lot of detail anyway. It's very diffuse light, but it does add interest. More and more detail I'm adding. I'm adjusting in, adjusting out, zooming. I have my brush now at 3%, and I'm just kind of squiggling some petal leaves down. Very light touch, but I'm using the orange. Just putting an outline. It's not even a complete flower. I'll let the eye connect the lines, make it complete. It's really good if you don't have complete flowers, because if everything is a perfect flower, you have all the petals and they're all in oval shapes or round, not much overlapping, it is boring. So I'm trying to put in a little bit of a wildness. There's some overlap. Doesn't have to be a lot. And the petals aren't really distinguished. Unlike on the left, I'm putting in some orange on the top, just on the left side of the petal group. And that's really making the flowers pop. Right now I'm doing line work, just putting a line around each petal, which is really cool. I'm not filling it in, and I really like the effect. This is going to be great. The colors are making me happy. So however I color this is probably going to make me happy anyway. But I just like the idea of doing little outline ovals around something I haven't really done before, but the spirit moved me, and that's what I created. And just using that orange over and over. I'm probably pressing just a little bit at times, just because I see that some places are light and some are dark. So if this is, and I'm sure it is, it's size 3 brush. If I start light and then I press a little bit harder as I pull the brush or push it, then I am creating a little bit more contrast. It's going to be more brilliant in color, and I will get maybe a thicker line. So it's quite nice. Right now I'm just popping in just a little bit of yellow, and I will touch this up later because that light yellow glow is great, but it doesn't really pop as much as it could, and it needs therefore a bit more color in the background. And that would be kind of like the radiance on the floor of the forest, while above you have the flowers themselves. Those little bell-shaped flowers are also glowing. So just having the heart of the daisies, or whatever those are, glowing would be very harmonious. Now I have a little disclaimer. As I was putting this tutorial together, this paint with me, the last 2 clips were just disaster. I have 2 iPads. One is 128 gig and one is 64 gig. And the 64 gig just fills up too fast. Anyway, somehow that thing recorded in slow-mo. I had forever trying to sync them, and they're not synced even now. So that's why things are a little bit out for the next couple of minutes. I did get them kind of synced, but I'm having to fast forward them because it's just not perfect, and it was irritating me. So you can see me now as I'm edging now along the face of the little tiny mouse. Now those bell flowers are supposed to be a little bit luminous, so I don't want to clean up too much around them. And this is something I noticed that when I zoom back out, that I did a little bit of too much, because I want them to be illuminating. But I am picking up the color, and I'm dragging it out and trying to clean it up so it looks, like I have a very clear mouse. And you can say, just as I'm doing this in fast motion, that it's really looking much better. And I've already done this once, so I'm doing it again. And what color am I using? This is in another palette. Very interesting color. And this is the Under the Sea palette. Under the sea, under the sea. I can't sing. Anyway, that I used two colors out of this palette. One is the blue, which is on the left, and the other is the pink on the right. And both of them are for very dramatic purposes. The blue, I'm not using it just yet, but the blue I use as a glaze on kind of medium or low opacity on the floor of the forest over all of the other blues and greens. And this is like a last touch before I finish. So it's that blue, and I'm just popping the color a little bit where potentially the moonlight could travel between the mouse and the mushrooms, and there's just an ongoing light. So that blue kind of picks up there. The pink actually, at its darkest, makes really nice dark. Not black, but very dark colors. And so I use it also as an accent for the background and to achieve really dark areas for like shadows on the mushrooms or maybe at the mouse's feet. Right now I'm not using any of those. I'm just picking up color from the background and just perfecting those little edges, sharpening them up, making them look much smoother, trying to achieve kind of a photorealism. I still want cuteness, so I want a little bit of a blur. I'm not trying to, it's not going to be perfect, which is fine with me. Trimming along all of those stems. I've done that so many times here. I think when I was doing the airbrushing, that was an area that did kind of use a wider airbrush, and I don't like, maybe I'm using like a deeper orange to glaze over that stem, but that deeper orange did throw out a little bit of an extra glaze on the darkness, and I don't want that. So I'm trying to clean up those kind of little messy parts, because that's how I make it look really clean and very inviting. Zooming in, zooming out, of course, that is my characteristic. It's actually looking pretty good to me. A little bit more between the mushrooms. Just a few gentle strokes on the back of the mushroom. And again, this is one of the blacks or one of those dark colors that I just picked up from the background. And right now I'm thinking about what to do with that floor of the forest. And here's when I pick up the blue. You will see that it's kind of, I'm going to guess it may be 35% opacity, using a fairly, maybe a 15 brush, I'm not sure. And I'm just trying to put in a little bit of blue glazing in the background. Blue goes beautifully against yellows and creams, and that is exactly the color of the little mice. So I'm putting in a little bit of blue background. And now I've changed it to the pink, dark pink. And under the flowers, I need a little bit of a shadow. So to make those flowers pop, I'm putting that dark pink underneath. Not everywhere, but just under, to kind of put a shadow to raise the flowers up. And again, I'm just flicking some shadows. Nothing specific. And I'm very careful under that bell. Oh yes, another disclaimer. I had two parts that I had trouble syncing. And like I said, one was filmed in slow-mo. Don't ask me how that happened. And so getting those to sync was like a nightmare. So I had to constantly clip and just slow one down and speed another one up, and what a mess. Anyway, Most of the painting was already done, and so you're just missing a lot of the fine tuning, which is not really serious. But I did want you all to see how I painted those cute little bell flowers because they're heart shaped, and my friend wanted to know how theoretically to paint kind of them in 3D so that the light was captured. And again, I'm just highlighting along the top edges. I have been doing some kinds of glazing here and there, and I might have glazed over some of those edges, but I want those last little peaks to pop. And once I put in the stems, there's not much more I can do to play with those flowers because I don't want those stems to, have any kind of lightning. It's so cute to be coloring around the hands or the little paws of that mouse. So adorable. Again, popping just the top edges. It's not at a super high opacity. I'm really not sure of the opacity, but the pen size or the pencil size is quite small. And it's not the pencil, it's the airbrush size. Picking up a really dark color and darkening underneath the stem. Touching it up one last time. And you saw me test, the opacity and the size of the brush against the darkness, against that light green background. Testing again. I do this frequently. I can just test and then erase. I love digital painting. And now I'm dropping in the stem. Erase and dropping it again. I didn't really like the angle. I am pressing a little bit more as I finish out that stem because I'm trying to leave a little berry. Watch this one. Pulling it down, leaving a little berry at the end. And even though I have kind of a stem in the background, I am not following the exact line, but I don't need to really clean it up because it's the impression of a shadow in the background of two of those stems. They weren't quite on the original stem that I had planned, but again, I had done just a light sketching of where I wanted the stems to be. Now this is another palette altogether. This is the Winter Wonderland palette. I love the red in this palette. The red has no pink in it. It is a pure red. And so it's one of my go-to reds for coloring, and I can actually turn up the color temperature, darken it or lighten it. Now when I lighten it, it does have a little bit more of a pink, but it's not dramatic pink like some of the reds. This is probably a Carmine red, which is delightful. And it is also delightful to say that I can now paint in those tails and say, this painting is done. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and I hope my friend especially loved the lanterns that I painted for her. And if you would like to see more animal painting tutorials, please leave comments below.